Hello, everyone. Here we are tonight in Somerville. We're going to do this little get-together. The four of us here. We're having a nice little conversation. And the subject is dreams, soul travel, and the wonder of you. And we're all members of Eckankar. We're a spiritual group. We've been around for a while. All of us here have been members of Eckankar for quite a while. And we do these things for free. We don't get paid for these things. We just do it because we get a lot out of this teaching, and it gives us a lot of benefits in our lives, and we just like to give back. And maybe you'll hear something tonight that'll help you in your life, and you want to use it. You know, we have some tools that we'll be sharing later. I'm going to start off by introducing my left is Becky, and then there's Rob, and then there's Susan. So hi, everyone. And before we get into my first question, do you have anything you'd like to say about why you're here tonight?
Sure. I'd be happy to go first. Thank you, Mark. You know, this particular teaching affords us with spiritual tools in order to understand our life better and our experiences, and also to live a more, I would say, heart-centered life in which we have more love in our life, and a recognition of how the divine works in everyday life.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Yeah, one of some of the great benefits we have here.
Yes, right.
We could have everybody ask, but I think I'll go right into the question that I was thinking about, because it kind of is almost the same thing, this question that I was going to ask. So, what interested you enough about dreams, soul travel, and the wonder of you to take time from your life to learn more? And it didn't necessarily have to be to join Eckankar, just to learn more, you know, something. And what would make you a seeker of these things? And maybe we'll start with Becky.
Yeah, I think, you know, my whole life I was a seeker. I always, even as a child, would lay in bed and wonder about God, or what is life about? Why am I here? And as I was growing up, that question just became more and more insistent for me. And I started doing a lot of reading about different spiritual teachings. I asked my parents to take me to church so I could learn about God. I just knew there was something more to life than just what I was experiencing on the surface. So I was really a seeker into college, and I started exploring all different kinds of teachings, and I wanted to find out, what is the meaning of life? Why am I here? What's the purpose? And when I was 24, I found the teachings of Eckankar, and that was the turning point for me, because it really answered my questions in a deep way, and it really resonated with what I already knew inside. It was like I would read things and I'd say, oh, I really understand that, or I already knew that, or it just really resonated.
Yeah. I remember once you were telling me a story about a dream that you had, I think when you were a teenager, that kind of made you realize there was more than life than it seemed, you know, reading in the newspaper there.
Yeah. I was 12 years old, and I had a dream where it was a very simple dream. I just came downstairs, sat at the kitchen table during breakfast with my mother across from me, and I started reading the newspaper, and the headlines were that there had been a crash of the Apollo, or not a crash, but an explosion on the launch pad of one of the Apollo moon missions, and several astronauts were killed. Anyone who has you know, come from our generation probably remembers this very distinctly. But anyway, I had this dream about the whole event before it happened. So I'm reading it in the newspaper, why it happened, very intense details about how it happened. And then a few weeks later, this event happened. And it really turned my world upside down, because I knew from this experience that life here, this space-time continuum that we experience, there was more to it than what was on the surface, clearly. And that was really the turning point for me, that I became a seeker at that point because I wanted to understand how could I have had a dream about something that hadn't even happened yet.
In a sense, you time traveled.
I time traveled, yeah.
So, yeah, kind of skews up the time, continuous time.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Turned it all upside down.
Yeah, I get it. But you, Rob?
Well, it's interesting. I had experiences as a child as well. You know, I remember as a very young boy where I was home alone. My mom, it was like the first time I was ever home alone. So I think I was, 3 or 4, and my mom had to go down to the store. So she says, just sit on the couch and don't do anything, you know. She was afraid I'd get into trouble while she was gone. but I listened, you know, I just sat. And what was interesting is I heard this sound, and it was kind of this high-pitched musical sound, and it was very entrancing, and it was very beautiful. And so I just sat there and listened to it until she returned. And I didn't understand what that was for a long time until many years later when I discovered the teachings of Eckankar, and they say you can hear this inner sound, and it can come in the form of music or sound of nature. It's been referred to, you know, in philosophy as the music of the spheres, meaning there's this inner music that sometimes, if we're still and quiet, we can hear. Another experience I had as a child, I was actually in a little accident where I got hurt, and it would just, you know, cause me some pain. And I just found myself out of the body, you know. It was like I wanted to get out. So it's interesting. I found myself observing what was going on to myself, and I'm hanging out with my siblings, watching. So here I am. I'm having a viewpoint outside the body until everything kind of was over, and you know, I kind of reintegrated. You know. So I was also a seeker from early on in my teens. I began to read many things, and I felt as though I had learned different pieces of the puzzle. You know, I was exposed to dreams, and I started keeping track of my dreams when I was 16, and I became aware of past lives, which made a lot of sense to me. But at the age of 20, when I found out about Eckankar, all of a sudden I put all the pieces of the puzzle together, and now I could see how it all tied in. And it's been a wonderful journey ever since.
Yeah, it's interesting how we're all so different, you know, because you're talking about early teens or before preteens. And I remember, actually, I had the opposite type of experience, because I remember once, and it probably had to do with my upbringing, very strict religious upbringing, and go to hell if you do certain things, you know. So I remember once I was lying in bed, and all of a sudden I started seeing these colors and hearing these sounds, and I shut it down, because I just shut it down. I said, this is, you know, that was my belief at that time, that this was not good, you know. It took me many years after that to kind of change my viewpoint about those whole things. So I guess you could say at that point, I'm not a speaker. I was not a seeker, you know. I was anything but, you know. But eventually there was something that came in my life that changed things. What about you, Susan?
You know, like everybody here, I was curious when I was a little kid. I used to walk to school, to elementary school, and talk about the sound. Boy, that was a thing. I used to walk to elementary school, and I would communicate with everything in the forest. And it was just natural for me to do that. The sound of the brook, you know, the sound of the trees, the wind in the trees, the smell of the pine cones, because we lived in an area in Connecticut where there were these beautiful long pines and evergreens. And I would just get entranced with that. So I was always kind of in a semi-dream state. And my mother was always trying to wake me up, because even in a waking state, I was dreamy. And, you know, and I would be in school. I remember I would be in school and I would be drawing. This is an elementary school, and I'd be drawing with everybody else. And this sound, the one that Rob talks about, this very high-pitched sound, it sounded like a locust or a katydid on the high wire in the summertime. Like, you know, but very, very high. And it came in and it just enveloped me. And it was almost, I thought it was for a long, long time, but apparently it wasn't. And I thought everybody had this sound, but I knew not to say anything. I just innately knew not to say anything, and it would come and it would go. There was no specific, it wouldn't come when I was angry, it wouldn't come when I was crying or when I was happy. It would just come and go on its own. And later I began to understand more about dreams. I had a nightmare dream where I was pregnant, and I was in the concentration camps. Now you have to know that in Mengele's lab, I was there, and I can still see it, but I don't have the impact anymore. And that was one of the good things about learning and becoming aware of all of these things that had happened in my life. And there were so many. I remember as a child, I found myself out in the hallway floating, you know, because my parents were fighting at the time and I didn't like it. And all of a sudden I found myself out of the body floating in the hallway. Oh, I didn't want to come back. And so that huge nightmare of the being pregnant was really kind of the turning point for me, that I must find what else is out there, because I had been searching and I still didn't find. So I was very despairing because it was a recurring nightmare. And, you know, I won't go into the details of it. However, it was very much a blessing now. It was horrible at the time because I lost sleep, but and I was frightened because I didn't know, because my mother was Catholic and my father was Protestant. What was I having a dream about a pregnant Jewish person, and I felt like I was alive in it? Why? You know, how could that be? And then later on, you know, finding Eck, I became so totally aware that these things are from past lives and they're recurring. And the awareness of knowing that was comforting, because I actually didn't connect it. I didn't connect the awareness. And there were so many things, so many tools like that that I found in Eckankar. You know,
Yeah.
not dogma, but tools to use to open, to know more.
Yeah, and dreams is one of the main tools that we use. And doesn't matter if you're an Eckankar member or not, really. I mean, a lot of people work with their dreams. As you're talking, I'm thinking about some dreams that I had when I was young, way before I joined Eckankar, way before I consider my turning point. My turning point was actually probably in my first year of college. And I remember it was like reading a history book. It was a history class, and it was talking about Jesus in the desert, 40 days, 40 nights. And there was just something about the way that was written in the history book that was like the floor dropped right from under me. And it's like, all of a sudden I had to know what was real, you know. Up until then, I kind of accepted a lot of stuff, but that changed. That was the big shift. Just those words in a history book, you know, about Jesus, you know, maybe start looking at other places. But before that, I was having these dreams, speaking of dreams, where when I was growing up, my father was in the church. He was like a deacon. He knew a lot of people, so he got me a job. As a teenager, I worked in the church. I did maintenance, mowed the lawns, and swept. The most boring job, one of the most boring jobs I ever had was sweeping the curbs. You know, on Saturday mornings, you had to sweep the curbs, and I'd be out there, you know, start at 10, I go a little bit, and I say, oh, it's got to be 10:30 now. Go in and look at the clock, and it's 5 after 10, you know. It's one of those kind of jobs. But anyways, so I was outside around the church a lot, you know. So, but then I was starting to have these dreams where the whole parking lot was flooded. It freaked me out, you know, there's water everywhere. And I was like, why is all this water here? Why is all this water here? And I could never figure out what that dream meant. And then many years later, I kind of figured out what it was telling me. It was like saying water is a symbol for spirit. And the spirit wasn't necessarily in the building. It was all everywhere else, you know. And eventually I got that. But at the time, I kept having that recurring dream, and I just didn't understand what it meant. I just kept having that dream. Mm-hmm. So dreams can show us a lot of things. And there's an interesting question in here. I'm going to scroll down. And we may have touched on some of these things, but there's a lot of experiences like this. So the question is, have you ever had a moment where out of the blue something dawned on you, or just happened to be in the right, or you just happened to be in the right place at the right time? Just perhaps when you were thinking about someone, they called you. And where do you think this spontaneous knowing might come from? You know, I was just thinking about this because this has been in the last couple of weeks. This has happened to me so many times. You know, at the seminar in Eckankar, we have these seminars. There's what they call major seminars. They have them in Minnesota. There's usually a few thousand people there, and the spiritual leader of Eckankar speaks at those, and his name is Harold Klemp. And there's also regional seminars, and they usually last about a weekend. There's talks, there's music, workshops, and there's a lot of love that's flowing. That's the most important part about it. You're just like in this sea of love that you just feel. You know, you can't help but feel it. So, anyways, I forgot where I was going with that, but
the seminars. We also have regional seminars.
And bumping a coincidence, or
the coincidences. That's right.
Yeah.
So, speaking of coincidences, yeah. So, anyways, they were at this seminar, and there was some music being played, and this guitar player who I knew had this great little effects box on the floor, and he got a perfect sound out of his guitar. I just loved the sound. He was playing a country song, so I asked him about it, and he gave me the name of it. Then I'm back at home working, and I repair electronic musical equipment, and I do sometimes at a store in Worcester. And I'm in the store, and it was like a few days. I said, I have to tell one of the guys in the store about this, and I kept forgetting. And then one day I said, oh yeah, I got to remember. I got to tell him. So I went right in the office to tell him, and it was just at the exact time that he's looking at the thing on the TV screen, wondering if he should buy it for the store or not. It was like total coincidence, you know, both these things happening at the same time, you know. Or there's been a lot of times where I just walk in someplace and somebody says, oh, I was just thinking of you, you know. Just have a question for you or something. So.
But that reminds me of vibrational rates.
Mm-hmm. How do you mean that?
So when I started to, I started to be curious about Eckankar. And I found out about it in quite a different way. I saw a picture in a lady's house. I was getting counseled by her. And I got up. I had finished my 2-year counseling sessions. We knew it. I was quiet. I was still. And I got up, and I had never seen this picture before on the wall. She only had 2 pictures, and one of them was an old mill, red mill with a grist, you know, a big wheel in the front. And I always looked at that. Very interesting. But then I got up and I looked, and there was this man with a white beard and a white cape over him and coal black eyes, very peaceful looking. And I said, Angeline, who is that? And she said, oh, that's Phoebe Quantz. He's one of the Eckmasters. And I looked at her and I went, Eck? I said, that's a funny name. And she went, oh, yes. She said, I'm a member of Eckankar. This was years ago. This was when I was 45 years old. And I became so curious So I started to sing this sound, this ancient sound for God, which is Hugh. And I started to feel my inner part of myself, especially my heart. I started to feel, honestly, a sense of well-being. And it wasn't huge, it wasn't big, it wasn't earth-shaking or anything. It just was a sense of well-being. So I kept on doing it. And I think that it helped me vibrate and align myself with who God is within myself.
Yeah, that's great. Rob or Becky, do you have something you'd like to share along these lines? We'll be getting more into the Hue as we go, because it's a very important part of what we do, and it's a great tool everybody can use.
Well, I'll just mention one thing. I think that what's interesting is that a lot of people everywhere are having spiritual experiences. As a matter of fact, once I read that 33% of the population has had some sort of spiritual experience, and yet they may not be aware of the significance of it. And it could be a dream or a deja vu experience. It could be an out-of-the-body experience, or it could be this feeling of peace or an expansion of consciousness. So what the teachings of Eckankar afford us is an opportunity to recognize what these experiences are, to learn how to tap into them more in a conscious way, and also the opportunity to get together with like-minded souls to share these experiences. Because sometimes we don't get that. If we try to share it sometimes with maybe family or community or coworkers, they may wonder what's going on. But when you find people who can validate that, yes, this is a spiritual experience, all of a sudden it gives you a bit more spiritual freedom. And that's part of what this is all about, in addition to opening ourselves up to love.
And what Rob is talking about there is really the essence of soul travel. We mentioned dreams and soul travel and the wonder of you. And both of what you're saying there, the peace and all these expansion of consciousness and all these other benefits that you get, is all part of what soul travel is. Everybody does it. You don't have to be a member of Eckankar to soul travel. Rebecca, did you have any thoughts on this? Or?
Well, I'm just thinking about this whole concept of expansion of consciousness and soul travel. And in a way, it's not really traveling as much as expanding and just being more aware of everything. And so, like, we live here in this physical world where everything is very tactile and on the surface, and what you see is what you get. But there's so many other dimensions to life, and so expansion in consciousness for me is becoming more and more aware of those other levels. So it starts initially with being more aware of feelings, or being more aware of what we call the astral worlds, and being more aware of who I am outside of this physical body. So I find that as I expand in consciousness, I identify less with this and more with who I am as soul. And soul is an eternal being, a part of God, and has all the same qualities of God. And as I expand into that, I take that on. I start to be living from a whole different place, a peaceful place, a sense of really understanding, like when something happens in life, there's more to it than what I'm seeing. So yeah, something happens and maybe it's something that doesn't feel good, or it seems like something like we call a bad script, where something goes wrong in life. Whereas before, I might have tried to just fix it and get past it as quickly as I could. Now I will look at it and say, well, I wonder why this is happening, or what can I learn from this? So that's what expansion of consciousness is. It's really looking at things from a deeper sense of, you know, what is there here to teach me? Or what can I give?
And I'd like you to share, I mean, you have this dream about, workplace dream many years ago where things aren't quite what they seemed.
Yeah.
And that's a good example. Maybe if you want,
Sure.
you can share that.
Yeah, so I was in my 30s, and I had been working as a toy designer for many, many years. Had a long career up to that point in this field. But I kept having this really strong nudge that it was time to move on and do a different job and work for myself. So there was a part of me that really wanted to do that and felt aligned with that, and then there was a part of me that was afraid to take the step because I had never had any other line of work. This was my sole income. And so I would put a date on the calendar and say, okay, I'm going to leave on this date, and give myself a comfortable 2-month range. And then it would come and go. And it happened over and over again. So in that time period of me going back and forth with this, I had a dream where I was walking down the hallway at work, and this man who was new to the company, I had actually met him in the real world. He had just taken the position of the director of another division. So in this dream, he comes up and he puts his arm around me and he says, "You know why I'm here, right?" And I said, "No." And he said, "Well, I'm here to get you out of here. That's why I'm here." And we were just laughing and like, oh, great, you know. And so I wake up from the dream, and I was at that time journaling all the time, so I wrote the dream down and then never thought of it again until probably a few months later, sometime within the next 6 months, this man all of a sudden became my boss. There was a reorganization in the company, and now he was my boss. And we just butted heads right from the get-go. He did not like me. I did not like him. And it was nothing like the dream. Like in the dream, we were really happy and you know, just enjoying each other's company. So long story short, I ended up having to leave the company. I had to leave my job because I couldn't survive it. And it wasn't until even after I left that I remembered this dream, which was so funny. I went back in my dream journal and I saw it and I said, that's amazing how I was prepared, right? So I would know there was a part of me, even though I didn't remember the dream, there was a part of me that was aware that this was all being orchestrated and it was all for love. Because in the dream, you know, it was very clear that he had come lovingly to help me move out of this job, even though in real life, it felt like anything but love. Like, he didn't like me, right?
You didn't like him.
And I didn't like him. But it just shows you how, you know, underneath the surface, love is at work. And that's what's moving life forward.
Yeah, it can take any shape, any form.
Yeah.
There's no limit to it.
Yeah.
Which is pretty amazing, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've gotten to the point where it's really amazing if something is happening that appears to be negative, actually is, but, you know, appears to be negative. I have gotten to the point of looking and saying, okay, what's the blessing in this? In other words, what's to follow? There's definitely, this is happening, but there's something that's going to follow it, that's going to reveal why this even happened in the first place, you know?
Yeah.
So that's happened to be many on daily basis, actually, really, on a daily basis.
Rob, yeah.
So, you know, the stories remind me of certain spiritual principles, which is that, you know, for example, your state of consciousness is your state of acceptance. And what that means is that as we go along, instead of being triggered by life and saying, oh, that's not right or that's not fair, and responding with anger or fear or some other emotion, we're a bit more detached and we're saying, okay, there's a reason for everything. There's a divine plan here. There's something for me to learn from this experience. You know, what is life trying to tell me? And we find that life speaks to us in many ways, whether it's through our dreams or other experiences. So part of it is that we have our inner antenna up and we're more watchful and listening and saying, okay, what's next? What's in store for me? So the idea is that things aren't happening to us, they're happening for us, for our spiritual benefit. And so how can I grow from this? Or what have I to give? Or what do I need to give up? You know, sometimes we have to give up our things that are holding us back. And so we are active participants in our own spiritual unfoldment. And so this is part of what we're learning here. And so it, as I said, it gives us more love and more spiritual freedom, and life becomes more of an adventure that we look forward to.
You know, when you're talking about love, I was looking for love. It was almost impossible. It seemed impossible to find it on the outside. I had a marriage that was always difficult, and I was working so hard at trying to find it on the outside. And it's not that I was a consumer either, you know. I actually thought that I could find love if I depraved myself, if I didn't buy things, you know, I'd be a good girl. And the feeling of being and knowing love from the inside, where I didn't have to expect it from anybody, was the most incredible sense of security, of nourishment, of feeling present with myself. And I'm not saying I was perfect, and I'm not saying I'm perfect now, but I don't have to be perfect to be loved, to feel loved. I don't. And that was the most revealing and wonderful feeling. I literally felt love. I felt as if I was hugged in places where I didn't even know I needed to be hugged, you know, through the tools. And I hesitate to say through the cue, but it's true, absolutely true, by singing cue on a daily basis. Sometimes more than once.
Sure.
Yeah, that what you're talking about is one of the core benefits, I think, because we're so conditioned in this world to look outside of ourselves for love and acceptance and approval. I know that was something I struggled with a lot as a young child and a youth, because I wasn't taught that I was lovable, right? And so I would seek it from outside of myself. And the thing that has really turned that around is through doing spiritual exercises, connecting daily with that part of myself that I know is soul. That's really my true essence. And that's where love is. That's where it comes from. So now it comes from the inside out. And That's a beautiful awareness and wonderful
is.
shift to have.
Isn't
Mhm.
it? Yes.
Right. It doesn't depend on anyone else. I have that source inside of me always.
And it's always true. No matter if I change, no matter if my place changes, this is a central feeling, and it's secure, and I know it, and I know that I can depend on it.
Yeah, I think this has a lot to do, like we were talking earlier about connecting with others. Because from my experience, it's when you have this love that flows, like when, I think we all started probably with the love outside of ourselves and started doing these spiritual exercises, and then the love started welling within. I know when I was first thinking, what is God? Even though I knew God is, they always said God is from within, God. I knew it in words, but I didn't really know it, until you start feeling that love that's inside, that peace, that love that emanates, and it gets so strong that it has to go out, And then you realize that's the God that they're talking about. That is the love, So, it helps us connect with others too. This connecting is just this love that flows out of us. And it can be with people or it can be with pets. And a lot of it is just about opening the hearts. And animals sometimes open hearts for people too, Has anybody had that kind of experience where an animal really opens your heart?
Every morning.
Every morning.
The house cat comes and says hello, whether at 5 o'clock, whether I like it or not. The house cat is this fluffy Himalayan Siamese mix, and he will come and he will just lay on my side. If I'm leaning on my side, he'll come up and just lean on my side, and it just feels so wonderful to have that connection, And so then I'm okay. Then I can do my spiritual exercise.
Yeah,
you
great.
know? Yeah. So he's wonderful. He's a wonderful blessing. He's not my cat,
Yeah.
because I live in a room,
Okay.
in a condominium, but boy, he sure acts like he's my cat.
Yeah. Well, he is in some sense,
Yeah.
Cats
He shares a
decide
lot.
who's theirs.
It's true.
Oh, yeah.
We all have cats, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and one thing that's interesting, there are many books published by Ekankar, and one of them is Animals Are Soul Too. So, Becky was speaking about who and what we really are as being soul, this divine spark of God. But we also recognize that all living beings, animals, also have this spark, and people very often recognize this in their pets. And I've been a cat lover all my life, and have had many special cats. And I remember once having a dream in which the two cats I had at the time were speaking to me, and they had very musical, sing-song kind of voices. And it was just fascinating to think that on an inner spiritual level, they were communicating with me in their own way. There was another experience years ago. A beloved cat had passed away through an accident, and it was a sorrowful time. But soon after, I had this dream with the cat in which I saw the cat sitting up in a tree, and from there it turned into a bird, like a hawk or an eagle, and flew away. And this dream represented to me that this soul was taking the next step spiritually. It was moving on to a higher level of existence. And so we do believe that sometimes the soul is eternal and never dies. So even though we miss our loved ones, we can still experience visiting them in the dreams. And sometimes they'll come back, a cat may come back as your next cat, And so that's nice to know that sometimes you would say, this cat reminds me of my old one. It's just like him, So that could be. I know I was always very close to my grandmother as a child, and she passed away in her 80s a number of years ago. But then I had this dream where it was so vivid. I saw her, and she was just as loving as ever, and I, ran and gave her a hug, and we told each other we loved each other, and that can bring some solace to an individual who may have lost a loved one, and to realize that you can still connect with them, and sometimes these spiritual exercises can help to open that door so that you can be aware of that connection and that presence.
Yeah.
Yeah, the spiritual exercises that you're talking about are more, for me, like contemplations. And in other words, I set an intention, and I will probably maybe start out with the hue, and it could be actually the whole spiritual exercise could be the hue, singing the hue, and I love to be of service with this love that I feel inside. As a matter of fact, I have to be of service. I cannot have this amount of love that I have inside and keep it. It's extremely uncomfortable. I have to give it out in some form, And so I don't know if we were going to talk about spiritual exercises tonight.
Well, we've been talking about them on and off.
Yeah, we have.
So
That's
it's
true.
good, but,
That's true.
As you were talking there, I wanted to touch on a couple of things, because in a few minutes we're gonna sing this song, The Hue. But your story there about the cat chasing or changing into a bird and moving into a higher state reminded me of, it was a few years back, and we do these, right here we're doing this television show, but sometimes we do these introductory talks in libraries and things like this on different subjects. And this one was a 4-week session on past lives, dreams, and soul travel. And there was a few people there. And so we got to the third, and we introduced the hue right at the beginning, and we shared it in each one. Now, the third session, only one person showed up, this lady. And she never really talked before at all, So I knew it was just the two of us, and I knew this is so she could talk, because she wouldn't if there was other people there. She was just shy. So anyway, she started asking me, she said, can you come back as a bird? And I said, well, I don't know. I suppose anything is possible, It's like, and then she started sharing a story about early in her life where she always was a bird and flew in her dreams. She was always a bird and flew. And then the bird died, and she never flew again. And now, after being in this class for the 3rd week and using the hue, she had a dream where she was flying again, So she was, something shifted in her. I never saw her again, but it didn't matter, because I knew she got what she needed there, She was ready to take her next step. She was taking her next step. She was flying again,
Yeah.
To me, that's the beauty of any spiritual path, It's just, we all take a step forward. When anybody takes a step forward, it's the most wonderful thing, I just, makes my day. So, but again, it was with you and this hue, which is a spiritual exercise. And I think let's share the hue now, and then we'll have a few minutes after to talk more. But the hue is a very simple exercise anybody can do. It doesn't matter what religion you are. You don't even have to believe in God. You don't have to believe in anything. But if you're open-hearted and you want to try this, you'll find that if you sing it with love over a period of time, it may give you some results. So it sounds like the man's name, Hugh, and we're going to do this together. We're going to sing Hugh for a couple of minutes. So you just, if you're doing this, you can close your eyes, and we'll be closing our eyes. And just singing this, it's a love song to God, and it's a non-directional prayer. We don't use it to pray, to change anything. It's just to open hearts. That's all it is. Open our own heart and to gain our own understanding. Not to open somebody else's heart, just to open our own hearts. And when you do that with that kind of acceptance, that's when you get the love inside, because this love of God is really unconditional. Call it divine love. There is no conditions to it. So when you're trying to direct it, you're putting a condition on it. This is the way that there is no conditions, by just accepting it and letting it be, this love. So we're going to sing just for a couple minutes. And if some people, when they sing this, you might be familiar with other words that are chanted like Om and stuff. And you could put an image in your third eye if you want, or you can leave it blank. Some people put a spiritual master there. In Ekankar, we use the spiritual leader of Ekankar who guides us in our dreams and in our lives if we want. He only works with people who want to work with him, or it could be Jesus or Muhammad or Buddha. It doesn't matter. You know, they're all spiritual beings, and they'll all resonate with the hue. So put one there and think of love, and you sing hue like this, and we're going to sing it for a couple minutes. Say, may the blessings be, that is the same thing as saying thy will be done. It's just saying everything. We trust in God. God knows better than us what's right for everything. So you get kind of the general idea of a hue, and you can sing it by yourself. There can be other voices. Sometimes people change their pitch if they're singing in a group. We have these hue chants that go right now in the area in Boston, actually in Arlington, on the second Saturday at noon, I believe. Is it at noon or at 11? Do you know? The sound
11.
It's at 11 at the Theosophical Society in Arlington. If somebody's interested in singing here with a few other people, they sing it for about 20 minutes, and then there's a couple minutes of quiet contemplation. So that gives you an idea of it, you know. So there's like CDs you can go and buy, and you can have like 5,000 people singing. You can sing along with them. Kind of opens up. When I'm driving around a lot, I put that CD in, and I'm singing as I'm going, you know. I sometimes have to be careful. If I'm really too tired, I can't really do it. You know, I have to put on some lively music because I don't want to be nodding at the wheel, of course. You know, but
And you can download it too.
You can download it too.
Yeah.
That's right. There's apps for it. So, anyways, that's the hue. That's the basic spiritual exercise that anybody can use. That is one of the main exercises we use in Ekankar. And many of the people did what Susan and Rob and Becky have been saying was the benefits that anybody can get from using this, no matter what you believe in, if you're just open about it. Anybody else like to share something about spiritual exercise? I think you might be next in line here. We have these two speaking. So.
Well, only that they have totally changed my life. I mean, I look back at my life, like I was 24 when I first found the teachings of Ekankar, and I can't believe the amount of growth and shifts that have taken place in my life. And I attribute it mainly to singing the hue and doing spiritual exercises. And because what happens, and this goes back to something you said, Rob, when I'm doing my spiritual exercises, I'm more aware in life. So I just notice more. I notice spirit or the universe talking to me, things that I don't notice. Like if I skip a few exercises, I start to miss a lot in life. And when I'm doing them faithfully every day, it makes life and every day so much richer, because I begin to see like the lessons behind things, or I even notice, or to even remind myself to ask the question, like, oh, what's going on here? There's something else going on here. And if I'm not as conscious, I will just miss it completely. So, and that's expansion of consciousness right there. It's just being more and more aware. And that's what the spiritual exercises do. That, and helping me to get through experiences in life in a more trusting and calm way. Because after I do a spiritual exercise, I'm in that state of calmness, and I'm able to go through my day with much more ease. And not to say that, you know, challenges always come up, right, in everybody's life, but there's something about that starting the day with a spiritual exercise that really sets the tone and helps me to look for the love in everything.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
You know, Rob, you said something the other day, and, you know, we were talking at the beginning of this about all being seekers and what is truth. And you had an interesting take on truth being in the moment. I don't know if you can... yeah, it was...
I think it was the idea that that truth is always here now in the present, and that, you know,
That's right.
sometimes people try to encapsulate it and say, oh, I have a piece of truth, and then once you do that, it's like you're putting limitations on it, and you're trying to say, well, this is now truth, you know, for everybody. But it doesn't really work that way. It's always coming from the invisible into the visible, moment by moment. So we need to be aware of what is truth, or what is the divine saying to me now, today. And so sometimes, you know, we get impressions or images, and as Becky was speaking, an image came to me that sometimes it's like looking out at let's say a lake, and maybe the wind is blowing, and, you know, the surface of it is very ruffled, and maybe there's whitecaps, and, you know, it looks like a storm is coming. But, you know, if you're able to go beneath, now you know, things are quiet, and maybe a better analogy is like a tropical ocean, because it's just full of life and all these, you know, fishes of different colors and just abundance of life. And so we find that if we look at life on a superficial level, we're missing a lot. But if we're able to look more deeply, we find that there's an abundance of life.
And on that same note, I will say that if you're flying a plane, it's the opposite is true too. If you're flying through the clouds, you get to a point where there's sunshine. And that's what I call soul's point of view. Looking at something as if you're flying above it and you can see the 360. If you're lucky, you know, if you're given that, you know, beauty of the 360. But it's the same, you know, it's funny that you should say that, because I was thinking, oh, well, it's true just the opposite too.
Right.
Yeah.
So
Well, that's like truth, right? It's never the same.
it's a different perspective.
One thing I like, you know, I love that image of truth, because when I think about that, it puts me, you become so alive, because it's right in the moment. Everything is happening, and you're right there. That's where truth is, where the rubber meets the road. Truth is living your life in whatever's happening right there and being aware of things. That is the truth. Everything else is,
Right.
you know, kind of static, but that is always evolving.
Yeah.
That is, like we call it in the Eckankar, the living word. The living word is everybody living their life, and you're just so full of being in the moment. It's just things are moving around you, and you're like in the center of it, you know, but you're observing, but you're right in it. You know, it's just...
And that's the wonder of you.
That is the
Right.
wonder of you.
Because you're living from the state of wonder. When you're in the
Yes.
present moment and you're not locked into truth in one way, then you're in a state of, well, what else?
Yeah.
What else is there? And that's the wonder
Yes.
of you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And being in that center space there, that is really, you know, we say another aspect of the wonder of you is that we are soul. We don't have a soul. We are soul. That's our deepest nature. It's this Paul Twitchell, who was the originator of Eckankar as it is in this lifetime. He had a book called
In my soul I am free.
In my soul I am free, but also the flute of God.
Yes.
And in the flute of God, he described soul as a unit of awareness.
Right.
So when you think of a unit of awareness, it's just, I think when I was a kid, I'm not the same at all as when I was a kid. But it seems constant because the awareness that's the one constant, is the awareness. And it's, that's where we're coming from when we talk about being up in the sky, or Becky had a song, The Eye of the Storm. I know a lot about Becky because she's my wife. But anyways, we're kind of wrapping up here. I think we have a minute or so to go. I'm just going to say, thank you for being a part of this, and hopefully you got something out of this. And we have other events that happen. We have the Sound of Soul event, like we said. We have a light and sound service in Arlington also on the third Sunday. But you don't have to go to any of these things. You just have to take this in, and maybe if you even start singing or not, whatever you do. But maybe you catch some insight that might help you if you're seeking and kind of wondering what's going on in your life.
You